So I think we'll get started today. My name is Amy Schock, and I'm the manager of the Neurology Career Center. With us today, we have a great presentation from Jeff Foster at Jackson Physician Search regarding rural opportunities for neurologists. And I think I'll just turn it over to Jeff. Just one thing is that we'll be able to take questions at the end. Jeff will be able to answer any questions that you have. Please use the chat box to submit any questions, and we'll cover those at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Amy, and welcome everyone. Before we get started, just wanted to provide a quick disclaimer that obviously this content was not developed by the AAN, and obviously everything in herein is from us, Jackson Physician Search, and so they're not developing this, and so just keep that in mind as you read through it. Really, there's nothing in here that's legalese, but ultimately, with anything legal advice, both our company and the AAN would always encourage you to consult a licensed attorney in your area. To get started today, what are we going to be covering? I think that we're going to talk, and not to sound cliche, about going country and the benefits of practicing medicine in rural America. It's trying to educate you on all of those practice locations that you may not be as familiar with, not the large cities, but smaller areas. And we really appreciate the AAN for inviting us and allowing us to share this information. A little bit about me. This is what I look like. I'm Jeff Foster. I work with Jackson Physician Search. We are a retained search firm, which basically means that hospitals of a rural nature a lot of times are hiring us to help and represent them directly to help them with searches. Why do they hire us? A lot of the reason is they're not big enough. They don't recruit enough physicians to have that function in-house, where you have the large companies like HCA and Kaiser, where they're big enough, they recruit enough physicians, they have the expertise in-house. A lot of smaller facilities just only recruit a handful of physicians a year and will collaborate with us on our expertise. And so a lot of our expertise does lie in sort of rural to suburban recruitment. And so hopefully through today and with my 15 years of experience, I can provide you at least a little bit of insight into what are the trade-offs you make by maybe practicing in a little smaller of a location. And so, the crux of this presentation is really for you to get insight into, is a rural or semi-rural practice right for you and your family? I'm going to start by just kind of talking you through the state of the industry, right? We'll talk about how many neurologists there is, where they're in patient care, and how many are typically interested in a rural area, just to provide you some context into the current marketplace. We'll also talk about the three benefits in our eyes of why a neurologist would choose a rural to semi-rural location. And then we'll answer any questions about and help you finding and evaluating the right practice opportunity. The one thing I always tell any physician I work with is there's no utopia. So there's no perfect jobs. And so hopefully we can highlight some of the pros and the trade-offs that you make by maybe sacrificing the size of the city. There's a lot of benefits for you professionally in doing so. But to provide some context, I think that you need to understand the marketplace. And this is just a little slide that talks about neurologists and where we stand from a global perspective, just here in the US. Right now, a lot of hospitals are using this first value to determine community need, where every hospital, whether urban, suburban, or rural, for every 23,000 people, probably need at least one neurologist to cover that demand. But we also know that demand exceeds supply, which is great as a job seeker in the sense that there's more jobs available than there are supply of neurologists seeking them. And so the good news for you as a job seeker is you have most of the leverage, right? You have most of the opportunity, and you're never going to be struggling to find the right job. Really, the only place that it becomes challenging is in these larger cities, right? I will tell you, I'm from Charleston, West Virginia, and it's a great place to grow up, but no one wakes up in the morning and wants to move there, right? But cities like a Denver, Colorado, a San Francisco, and New York City, that in those areas, more and more people want to be there because they are larger destinations. And so the supply and demand continuum there can shift a little bit. As far as how many neurologists are there out there, there's about 12,000 neurologists in active patient care as of today. And I don't know how many of you have heard of the looming physician shortage, but year over year, we have less and less neurologists, because as you can see, over 50% are within the 10 to 12 year range of retirement. The good news is we have seen growth in neurologists since 2014, a growth of 5%. And that's a lot to do with 96% of all the first and second year residency spots are filled. Really the common funnel of why sort of the demand and the supply shifts is ultimately there's not enough residency and fellowship programs nationally, and obviously neurology residencies to backfill these older baby boomer generation physicians who are needed retirement. And as we estimate, only about 8% of all residents, and this is across the medical spectrum, but all residents are choosing rural locations. So there's not as many people that want that type of lifestyle. And so you look at this map here. It's a great view of population density, right? You can see that if you look sort of on the left half of the screen, it's way less dense than the right half of the screen, right? And that's because we know that probably about 60 to 70% of our entire population lives east of the Mississippi. From a rural perspective, and we're talking towns of less than 30 or 40,000 people, about 20% of Americans live in rural areas and don't have as much access that a lot of us enjoy in larger metros. The challenge becomes, though, that we would hope that if 20% of our population lives in rural areas, the same would be about physicians. But the reality is that only about 10% of physicians do practice in rural areas. And if you tie that back to the number of active practicing neurologists, right? There's about 12,000 neurologists, 10%, that's about 1,200, which seems like a big number, but then you divide that by 50 states, and you're really looking at 24 neurologists per state, which obviously isn't a huge number. And that's just doing straight math, right? We all know that the population of California is much more than the population of Montana. So it really highlights the need for those sort of states that are more rural, don't have as much population centers. They struggle really with access for care, which ultimately as a job seeker and as a professional provides a ton of opportunity. There's disproportionate access as we kind of address, but here's some of the numbers, right? In an urban area, you'll see that whether people have just general neurologic conditions, that they have dementia, they have stroke, they have Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, they have better access in an urban location, and the percentages bear that out. And so the challenges for these patients in a rural area is it's not as easy for them to find or get in to see a neurologist. And oftentimes they're having to travel great distances to do so, which obviously is a challenge throughout healthcare, whether you're a neurologist or an endocrinologist. But I think this is very illustrative of the marketplace. As a physician, a lot of people don't understand, though, the impact that they can have. And when you join a group in a large metro like in Los Angeles, right, you won't see and feel as much of this impact as you would joining a practice in a smaller area. Adding one physician to a community, as you'll see here, of 10,000 is associated with a 5.3% reduction in average mortality, which, in a city of over 1 million people, it's less impactful than when you look at it of a city of less than 30 to 40,000. And each physician not only supports 14 jobs, but they have a $2.2 million impact to the community, which, again, in a large metropolitan area can go unseen, right? Because there's so many physicians, there's such a huge population. But if you can imagine living in a town of 20,000 people, right? just one physician moving there creates such an economic impact for them because of just how small they are. And so why would you ever want to go rural or go country, right? Obviously, there's challenges within it, right? You're not in as a big city. There's not as many amenities. And the level of tertiary care that's provided just isn't as much. But there are some pros, and they're pretty profound. I think the first to identify is number one, the elevated skill set, right? You are a lot of times in the smaller areas, you're one of one or two or three neurologists. And so you're getting to see a lot of breadth of practice. You're getting to keep all of those skill sets sharp. You're more often to be a workplace leader, right? There's more opportunity for leadership, medical directorship, chief medical officer, all these types of things. And ultimately, you're a community leader as well. People view you as a leader in the community, and that has a lot of impact as far as, outside of work, right? Joining different boards of different companies in the community. You're seen as an expert in one field, and that expertise can translate to other fields as well. Reduce burnout, right? I think that's a key piece, right? More autonomy. Most rural practices, because of smaller populations, aren't requiring you to see as many patients. A lot of these small practices, right, in a town that can only support one or two neurologists, they don't even have ER call, right? Because they know that requiring you to take 10, 15, 20 days a month of call is unsustainable, that they just have outpatient practices. I know for a lot of people, quality of life is important. Getting a better call schedule is important, and know that in a lot of rural communities, there's no call whatsoever, which, in turn does provide a better work-life balance. Your evenings, your weekends can always be free. Ultimately, there's less bureaucracy within the healthcare organization, right? You join a large company like HCA or a Kaiser or any of your large academic facilities. A lot of times as a physician, you can just kind of feel like a spoke in the wheel, where driving change, influencing culture, making practice changes, making changes to operations becomes increasingly difficult. Whereas in a rural or semi-rural site, typically every physician has a direct line to the CEO, and oftentimes is meeting them bi-weekly, once a month, just to talk about the status of the healthcare organization. In addition, there's more ability to do telehealth. We all know that access in rural areas is less. And so a lot of these places will have sort of a hybridized schedule where some of your work is in person and the rest is from home, where you can see patients right in your living room or your home office. And ultimately, we all work for a reason, right? Obviously, as a physician, you want to work to care for the patient, but we also work so we can afford our lifestyles, right? And in rural communities, you'll often see increased salary. There's more opportunity for these organizations and states, federal government, to provide student loan repayment and forgiveness. And ultimately, you have a lower cost of living, right? In the sense that, if you're a neurologist and you're making $400,000 a year in Los Angeles, right? That's not going to go very far when you're looking at homes that the median cost is above $1 million. Whereas if you look in a semi-rural to rural community, the cost of housing and the median home cost can be only $200,000. So from a home perspective, you have 5 times as much buying power working in a smaller location. And so, obviously we kind of dive into each of these, with the opportunity to elevate your skill set, breadth of practice, right? I know that there's a trend for a lot of physicians to want to subspecialize, but on the other end, and equally to that, there's a lot of physicians out there that love to be a generalist and not be pigeonholed into only being an expert in one type of the field. And so being in a smaller location, you do get larger breadth of practice, and you do get more ability to expand your expertise, in the sense that for most of these places, they have access to 1, 2, 3 neurologists. And so you kind of become a jack of all trades. Within that, right, every hospital that has a department of neurology needs a department leader. And whether that's a medical directorship or chair or whatever you want to call the title, obviously there's more opportunity to be involved in leadership in smaller communities. And as I addressed before, you are seen as a key pillar of the community. And the community will lean on your intelligence and your expertise, not only to be involved in healthcare matters, but it also opens a lot of opportunity for you to participate in various government boards, other company boards that are in your home community, and really sort of expand your expertise outside of the scope of just medicine. Mitigating burnout. I know we all think about that. I know, especially if you're in training, if you're in practice and you're taking call every third, every fourth night, that can be pretty burdensome. It can take you away from your family. It can take you away from your social passions. And so a lot of these more smaller locations and rural sites, they don't have as much burnout. Ultimately, you pretty much have total autonomy into how you practice. Whereas when you're in an urban setting, you join a larger group, they're pretty much telling you how you have to practice. Again, you have open lines of communication to the CEO. You have greater influence over operations, over culture, and even over hiring decisions, both from physicians that are going to join you, as well as support staff, where those decisions would be yours and not made on your behalf by a larger group. Lower patient volumes, right? More time to document. You really get to know your patient population and you really get to care for them, right? When a lot of instances, more urban practices are requiring you to see 18 to 20 patients a day. And most rural sites, that's 12 to 15. So you just have more time. You don't feel as rushed, and you can take a little bit longer time in your decision making. Better work-life balance, as I kind of touched on before as well. Some of these places have call, and if they do, not all calls created equal, right? 1 in 6 in a large metro could be meaning that every night you're on call, you're pretty much in the hospital. Whereas 1 in 3 in a very rural community may mean that every third time you're on call, you only get called. But at the same time, a lot of these places, they don't even have formal call schedules because, a lot of them aren't able, they know that if they had call and you were taking, whether it's 8 or 10 or 15 days of call a month, that's going to burn you out and make you leave. And so ultimately, a lot of these places just allow you to have sort of more of an outpatient practice. In some instances, they'll ask you to do the occasional neurologic inpatient consult, but a lot of times those will just be built in to your 9 to 5 schedule, which obviously provides a better work-life balance, provides you more time at home, and whether that's with family, whether that's traveling, or whether that's pursuing any other endeavor, you're not as tied to a pager or your cell phone or making sure you're readily available to tackle any patient issue. With telehealth, we obviously get the better ability to serve a broader community. And so a lot of these sort of smaller practice sites and smaller communities not only allow you to, have more time with patients, but sometimes they're hybridized models where only a fraction or a percentage of your job requires you to be in person, which allows you to be at home and enjoy those amenities and that type of thing. And I think most importantly, the opportunity to build wealth. When we look at neurology salaries and we look at them on a basis of population density, we've noticed that typically and on average, and this is across the country, and in certain states it's more, in certain states it's less, but typically a neurologist working in a smaller community typically can make 10% more. And a lot of people find this to be fascinating. I kind of have termed this the reverse economics of physician staffing. And what a lot of people don't realize, and a lot of people, like you take an industry like tech, where, you look at Silicon Valley and San Francisco and tech hubs like Denver and Los Angeles, right? Those tech workers make more, right? Because the cost of living is higher. The challenge, though, within the scope of medicine, though, is that we're all of your collections, the money that's made by a physician is driven by the payers, right? And what we mean by the payers, it could be the government, whether that's Medicaid, whether that's care. It could be private payers. It could be Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna or Cigna. The challenge within wealth as a physician is there's no cost of living adjustments on an EEG or an EMG. And so whether you're doing that in a really expensive place to live or you're doing that in a really affordable place to live, those values are the same. And when you couple that with the fact that in smaller communities, overhead costs less, right? And what we mean by overhead could be rent on the building, buying the building. It could be staff salaries. It could be a myriad of things which create an economic difference, which whether you're in a hospital employed environment or in a private practice, you're paying less for rent or lease or the building or your staff salaries, which keeping all collections the same, your collections minus overhead, the ratio of that is higher. In addition, most of these places, because it is generally harder to recruit to a rural area or a smaller area, do provide very healthy sign-on bonuses. I've worked with various neurologic practices across the country, and those in smaller areas are often offering sign-on bonuses of anywhere to $50,000 to $100,000 to incentivize you to join them. And they're also doing different things as far as providing student loan repayment, whether that's via the hospital itself, via the federal NHSC program, via most states have their own loan repayment program. You have better opportunity to receive those dollars there. And as we talked about a little bit, the lower cost of living, right? We know that San Francisco, kind of typically the most expensive place to live, average home cost is $1.5 million, right? Where, if you're making between $300,000 and $400,000 a year, which a lot of neurologists are, that becomes fairly difficult to buy a home. But if you look at a sort of a smaller size community like in Albany, Georgia, the median home cost is only $155,000. And so you really can, not only make more, but build more wealth long-term in the sense that you have more dollars to allocate towards investments and other different things. As we see, the average compensation for neurologists in 2020, and this is from a Medscape neurologist compensation report, was about $290,000. Just using the straight 10%, if you were to take the average comp and take that to a rural community, you're looking at almost $30,000 more a year, right? So that's a pretty significant difference in pay and can go a long way to achieving, whether that's helping you with student loan debt or achieving those financial goals and needs that you have. The average incentive pay for a neurologist is about $40,000 on an annualized basis. So if you look back and you take the 290, you add the $40,000 odd dollars in production there, you're at $330,000. If you were to look at that in a rural community, again, taking into account that 10% difference, you would be looking at an additional $33,000, bringing your income to what could be $370-ish thousand, which is quite a great wage. So all that said, there's a lot of benefits to working in a smaller area. There's obviously some challenge as well, which is kind of why I alluded to there's no utopia. And really, as you start to think about that job search, you really want to identify what's important to you and your family. But how are you going to go out and see? You've heard me talk and you say, wow, this is great. I can make more, have more autonomy. This is all I've been looking for in my practice career. How do I go about finding them? The obvious first answer is going to job boards, right? The AAN has a fantastic job board where you can go and search by a location, whether that be state, city, or geographic region that you want to target. The job board allows you to search in many different ways. You can also look at social media. That would include everything from Instagram and Facebook, Proximity, LinkedIn. All of these rural sites are spreading their job marketing to all of these places, making them easier to identify. Physician recruiters, folks like myself, We represent certain jobs, but we work in the larger context of an organization where we have handfuls of recruiters. I think right now our organization has 35 different recruiters who are all working on different opportunities. And so if you reach out to one, they may not have exactly what you want, but it's likely that one of their colleagues do. And ultimately, associations, right? The AAN, but there's larger associations out there as well that have job boards. And at the end of the day, Google search, right? Most of these job boards are doing a great job of highlighting the best jobs, and you can easily find them. And the good news is there's more jobs available than there are neurologists looking for jobs. So when you are looking, you do put yourself in the position of choice where you can typically interview anywhere from 3 to 5 places. You're probably going to get offers at most of those places, and you can kind of compare and contrast and negotiate to not only get the best offer, but to get that best offer in that best practice location that you were seeking. And so, evaluating rural opportunities can be harder, right? Because there's less familiarity with the geographic region, the geographic location. But there's a ton of culture and engagement that you can get that you're not going to get in a large bureaucratic organization. Number one, just because they're smaller in size, the quality of communication across the organization is easier, right? Functioning in a group of 3 physicians is much easier to function in a group of 30, just in the sense that managing 3 personalities is much harder than managing 30. But also trust in the healthcare organization's leadership team, where, if you join a larger group, whether that's a multi-specialty group or a neurology specific group, you can kind of tend to be a spoke in the wheel, especially early on. Whereas physicians that join smaller organizations and smaller locations typically build trust, buy-in, and get to the leadership end at a much faster pace, which obviously for various physicians is important in their careers, which allows you to accelerate your upward trajectory. And, these are some of the best elements that lead to job satisfaction. Studies show this, that the more you feel communicated and the more you feel trusted, those 2 things oftentimes are the biggest drivers to job satisfaction. And it's much easier to find those things in a smaller rural to suburban practice because, again, you're one of a few trusted physicians, as well as it's much easier to communicate. And ultimately, if high-level leadership is very important, it's a lot easier to accelerate that and get to higher levels of leadership by being in smaller organizations to start, and then over time working in larger and larger facilities. Hospital CEOs, they do this a lot, right? Well, they'll start and they'll be the CEO of a small hospital, to a medium-sized hospital, to a large tertiary referral center. And the same can be for a physician in various lines of leadership, if that's something that you're looking for. And so ultimately, it's also important that you understand how to evaluate these opportunities, right? You've identified you want to live in a smaller location due to the quality of life and the financial benefits, but how are you going to evaluate which is the best for you? Number one, I think that the best organizations will interview the best, right? Because they care the most about your experience. And that experience is not only your experience, but that in lies with the patient experience as well. And so was the interview customized directly for you? A great organization will make sure that happens. An organization that doesn't make that happen, that's a pretty good insight into what it's like to work there. Do you feel aligned with the leadership and the colleagues? That's equally important. And in a rural site, you're going to get to see that a lot easier because you're going to meet every member of the leadership team. Are you hearing consistent messages? That is incredibly important as you start to evaluate your jobs. Any great organization has consistent messaging throughout, and you'll see that because everyone's satisfied, everyone's happy, everyone's on the same page. Whereas if you find yourself in an interview or find yourself in exploring opportunity and you're seeing a lot of inconsistency in the messaging, that can be a direct correlation to job dissatisfaction, which ultimately means that a lot of the physicians there probably aren't as happy, which is illustrative of what it's like to work there. And then ultimately, will you have a voice not only in the organization, but also in the community? The interview process is a great place to suss that out. If they're asking you about your long-term goals, where you see yourself in 5, 10 years, where you want to be, what are you engaged in professionally, but also socially, organizations that are looking at all of these aspects are the organizations where you're going to find that best satisfaction. And so, what you should expect. I mean, these are really important things. And I would tell you, if you're not seeing these things in your interview, that may be very illustrative of what the organization puts a priority on from a recruitment perspective, right? And are they providing your transportation? Are they creating a memorable experience? Are they taking you to do something social, right? Whether that's a dinner or whether that's taking your children somewhere. They're not only getting to know you as a professional provider for their organization, but also as a person. Is the interview experience professional, right? Is everything timely? Is everything organized? Are you getting to meet the CEO, right? That's a big thing. Most smaller locations, absolutely you are, whereas a larger organization you go to, you may not. But the CEO can really sell their vision of the organization, how they're providing impact to the community, and oftentimes will be very receptive on how you can augment that. Are they highlighting aspects of their community? Are they tailoring that aspect to you and your family? Everyone's different. Everyone has different needs. And so how are they doing that effectively? And ultimately, how are they leaving things? I am the biggest believer that uncertainty is the killer of all deals. And I'm sure many of you have been on interviews where there was a lot of uncertainty after you left. Well, I can tell you that the best employers and the best organizations are making sure that there is no question left unanswered, and ultimately are following up with you to reinforce that there isn't, and to reassure you that they think that you would be a great fit. So these are just some of the key aspects that I encourage anyone to think about as they start to evaluate any of your opportunities, whether urban or rural, but especially in a rural setting. These are things that are key, because if you find all of these things, I can promise you, you are finding a great place to practice medicine. And ultimately, do these check all your boxes, right? I'm the biggest believer that there's 5 things that people consider when they look for a job. And this is not for neurologists, this is for everyone that looks for a job in any industry. And that's number 1, where is it? Where am I working? And that could be, driven by it could be regional, it could be city specific, but also in a larger city, it could be neighborhood specific, right? What does that have on my commute? What is the quality of life that I'm provided? What is the compensation? What is the quality of practice? And the 5th one is typically, who am I working with, which is what's important in the interview process, but it's harder to suss out opportunities until you actually are on site to interview. But really evaluating, is this meeting my financial needs in the right location with the right work hours, which will dovetail into providing me the quality of life that I'm seeking. I mean, we all know that the more you work, the more you make. And some folks are more invested in sacrificing comp for quality of life, where others say, I'd rather have less quality of life for compensation. And so as you start to think about that next career step, I really encourage you to evaluate all 4 of these boxes, because you're oftentimes going to be making trade-offs between them, right? We talked about there's a 10% compensation jump, typically by working in rural to semi-rural areas. And so it's a great place that you can not only increase your compensation, but also have a great quality of life. Whereas if you're looking in more urban locations, you're likely going to have to sacrifice one or the other, right? You're either going to have to sacrifice the income potential to get the better quality of life, or sacrifice the quality of life to get the better income potential. Keeping in mind that in most urban locations, it's also a lot more expensive place to be. So your dollar just doesn't go as further. Some additional resources I wanted to leave you with and wanted to provide for you. These are just resources that we provide to everyone. I encourage you, if you've never been, to check out our website. Obviously, we have a job board that represents all of our jobs, but moreover, organizationally, we pride ourselves on the education piece of providing physicians education in the job search environment. I have never seen one neurologic patient and never will, but this is the space that we at Jackson Physician Search live in 24/7, 365. So while you're all experts in neurology, we view ourselves as experts in the recruitment space. And so there's a lot of good resources in there. Number one, sort of our job search playbook. I know that, for a lot of residents and even practicing physicians, right, you only search for a handful of jobs throughout your career, and it becomes an uncertainty, right? You're just not as comfortable with it. And so that job search playbook, which you can look at, will kind of provide you a great guide. We also have a salary calculator. We all want to know where we can go and what we can make. So this is a great tool for you to be able to look at regionally where our salaries, and if money is the biggest driver and location is as important, it's a great tool to figure out where you can maximize your income. We also have some great links to finding out loan repayment options in various locations. We use NerdWallet as a cost of living calculator where, all things aren't equal from a cost of living perspective. So if you're thinking about moving to a different area, it's a great tool to figure out, $350,000 in New York City is very different than $350,000 in Augusta, Georgia. And this tool allows you to really look into what impact that would have on you and your family. We have our blog, where periodically we have white sheets of just things that we want to highlight that are going on in the physician recruitment space and what's happening with jobs nationally. The good news is that these articles are all positive for you as the job seeker. And it all ties into the fact that there's more jobs than there are board certified neurologists that are looking. So you're always in a position of strength. And the AAN also has a great tool, salary calculator, where you can, compare and contrast salaries as well. So there's tons of resources that you can dive into and look at. Just a few fast facts about us. We've been in this business for over 40 years. We're headquartered in Atlanta, but our recruiters are scattered regionally with regional offices in Dallas, Denver, and St. Louis, which really cover different sections in the country. So if you're looking in the Southeast, Atlanta is a great place because they're close. They know that area. Whereas myself, I'm in Denver, so I'm very experienced in recruitment to the Mountain West and the West Coast, even Alaska and Hawaii. We're voted this year 3rd by Modern Healthcare's Best Place to Work, which hopefully that means that when you talk to one of our recruiters, you'll talk to someone that's happy and engaged in their job and is excited to help you. We're just a great place to be. But I really appreciate the AAN for inviting us today. Hopefully I was able to impart some knowledge into sort of what trade-offs you make by going rural, going country, but would love to open up the floor to any questions. You'll see here, there's my contact information. So if you wanted to follow up with me after just to get some insight or figure out what neurology jobs we have, give me a call, shoot me a text. We also, all recruiters have been at all of the AAN virtual job fairs all week. So if it's an easier avenue for you to stop there, we're putting our best and brightest there each evening where you can tackle those. And thank you for thanking everyone for attending. We will be doing a drawing for a $100 gift card. And we'll be doing the drawing later this week and reaching out to that person individually to reward that prize. But thank you again to everyone, and would like to open the floor back to Amy and any questions that came up.
Thanks, Jeff. That was really great information. I appreciated how you summarized sort of the benefits and what to look for. I have one question. What is the highest signing bonus that you've ever seen?
Speaking specifically to the neurology space, I've seen practices offer even up to 1 year's annual salary in onboarding incentives. So if we were to say, taking the slide, the average salary is 290,000. I've seen practices that are willing to offer up to that amount in an onboarding incentive. Some of these onboarding incentives aren't direct cash allocations. So the ones that I see are at that level, a lot of times have to be allocated towards loans and housing and specific things. And then ultimately they have a longer term commitment, right? I've worked with a practice on the West Coast that does offer this. They offer up to 1 year's annual salary for any of their physicians, neurology included. But the more in the amount that you take, it does drive a longer commitment to practicing there in the community. But yeah, up to 300,000 has been the largest. So pretty hefty.
Wow. And so Jeff mentioned the virtual career fair. We'll be having virtual career fair again this evening. It's from 4 to 7 o'clock Eastern time. You can find it on the Career Center site. If you log on to careers.aan.com and click on the events page, you'll find a direct link to enter the space. And you can search for jobs, or you can just jump right in and tell the Career Center team kind of what you're looking for, and we'll match you up with recruiters that are participating in the event. I'd like to encourage everyone now, if you have any questions for Jeff, to use the chat box. I don't see any questions so far that have come in, but anybody, just any questions that you have, we'll just give you a couple minutes to type something in. Elizabeth says, thanks for the very informative talk. I learned a lot.
Great. Well, I appreciate you for allowing us to have this time to speak, and hopefully, whether you took a lot out of it or a little bit out of it, our role as an organization is to help physicians find jobs. But in addition to that, we kind of view ourselves as an informational hub. So whether you're actively looking or just want insight into what the job market looks like, take to visit our website or reach out to any of our recruiters. They're all trained and experts in the space.
All right, so no additional questions. So I think we'll end this today. These webinars are being recorded and will be available on the Neurology Career Center site in the future for people to download. So I thank you for participating today, and especially Jeff for taking time to share all this information with us.
Hey, it was my pleasure, Amy, and I hope the rest of the virtual conference goes well. And again, hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Yep, that would be great. Thanks, Jeff.
All righty, thank
Talk
you.
to you later.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.